right, we're going to begin. We're going to begin back in session. Our next session has to do with Council Bill 210080. Again, the ordinance of estimates for the fiscal year ending in June 2022. I am Felicia Porter, Councilwoman for District 10. We are joined in chambers, well, not joined in chambers by anyone. We are joined by Vice Chair Sharon Green Middleton virtually. Also, we're joined by Councilman Antonio Glover, Councilman Robert Stokes, Chairman Eric Costello. We also have City Council President Nick Mosby. We also have Councilman Ryan Dorsey, Councilman Gitsi Schleifer, and Councilman Zeke Cohen. From the mayor's office, from the mayor, representing Mayor Brandon Scott's office, we have Natasha Mehew and Nia Themelis. From the City Council President Nick Mosby's office, we have Councilman Matt Stegman and also Nikki Thompson. Oh, I'm sorry, I would be remiss to say we're also joined by Councilman Mark Conway from the 4th District. We have Ms. Marguerite Curran, staff of the committee. And today, also, we're joined by City Administrator Chris Shorter. And in today's hearing, we're going to be hearing from MEMA, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and we are joined by Director Catalina Rodrigues. Director Rodrigues, I'm going to ask you to keep your presentation to 10 minutes to ensure that the committee members and also other council members have an opportunity to ask questions. We have a hard stop here at 3 o'clock for our next session, which is Rec and Park. So I'll turn it over to you for a short presentation, and then we'll launch right into the Q&A period.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Porter. And I have Katie Miller from MEMA, who's going to share a PowerPoint presentation.
And I'm sorry, Director Rodrigues Lima, you are on mute, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Oh, there you are. Sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Porter and members of the City Council for this opportunity to allow MEMA to present on the work that we do. I'm joined by with Katie Miller, who is our Deputy Director. Katie, if you can just move to the next slide. The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs was created in 2014, and its mission is to promote the economic growth, community well-being, and the integration of the 50,000 foreign-born individuals that live in the city of Baltimore, which actually constitute 8.5% of the population. About a third of immigrants don't speak English, so a lot of our work is around these communities. Next slide, please. Our role as an office is to advise the mayor, cabinet, senior staff. We also assist city agencies with policy, outreach strategies, messaging, resources, best practices. We're a source of information and communications for people who can speak English, but also to city agencies. We also do a lot of community outreach and relationship building. Although Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods, a lot of our folks are not necessarily placed in these platforms. So we meet communities where they are, mainly in nonprofits, ethnic civic groups, faith-based communities, schools, and ethnic media. And we also manage the city's language access program, which I'm going to touch on. And finally, we respond to the needs of immigrants impacted by the federal policies and practices. Something that's important to highlight, as a division, we are not a service delivery agency. Our role is to expand the capacity of frontline agencies. So basically, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. Next slide, Katie. Consistent with our mission, our areas of focus are on economic growth, community well-being, and government accessibility. Under economic growth, a third of our budget actually manages a grant that is subcontracted to the International Rescue Committee to employ close to 180 refugees that live in the city of Baltimore. Part of this program also provides vocational training services to refugees living in Baltimore as well. Next slide, Katie. In our role as a technical assistance provider in government accessibility, this is where language access exists. As I mentioned earlier, our office manages language access to ensure that services and resources are reaching people who can't speak English. In the city of Baltimore, we have close to 21,000 individuals who can't speak English based on the languages of Spanish, Mandarin, French, Korean, and Arabic. In this role, MEMA works with 12 city agencies to ensure that they have a couple of components. They have a plan on how to support LEP individuals They are trained on how to work with people who can speak English. They also have a language access liaison that can work with our agency. And as you may have seen from our budget this year, we have $100,000 which will serve to translate vital documents that have been identified over the last year across these 12 city agencies. Next slide, Katie, please. And then finally, in our role as a entity that oversees community well-being across communities, we had mainly focused on public safety and access to legal services, which is a very important component for immigrants and is part of the community safety net. However, because of COVID, we've shifted our responsibilities to focus on these 5 items. Our office actually, since the beginning of COVID, has been working with the JIC to make sure that all of the information coming out of the city has been translated in the city's 5 core languages. We also had been training frontline employees to make sure that when people are calling our phone numbers, that they are accessing telephonic interpretation. We also have been serving as a source of information to our constituencies. We have 5 communication channels on a weekly basis to share information in English, Spanish, Arabic, French, Korean, and Mandarin. In our role as a technical assistance provider, we have been working with planning, Baltimore Development Corporation, MOCFS, to make sure that as economic and health resources were being made available, there were no barriers related to language, but more importantly, that there were no barriers related to immigrant status. Our communities have mixed status households, which means that parents may be undocumented and children may be US citizens. We also have been working diligently in raising private funds to support immigrants who were excluded by the CARES Act. This means a lot of our families were not able to access stimulus checks or PPP or unemployment insurance. To date, we actually have raised over $2 million to support 3,000 households, which were not eligible for some of the federal funding. And then finally, we've been working closely with the health department to make sure that we were working with the Latino community in particular, which was highly impacted because of the pandemic. So a lot of testing, vaccination, and I'm actually very proud. You may have heard the mayor this morning mention that the rate of Latinos, the vaccination rate of Latinos is comparable to the non-Latino population. So our efforts in working with CASA, Esperanza, the health department have been working, and we're really proud of that work. Next slide, Katie, please. And then finally, our work is rooted on national best practices and local needs. And we're actually one of 10 cities in the country that has been welcoming certified. This means that we are following best practices as it relates to how we respond to the communities in our city. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Rodrigues Lima. If you could take your presentation down while we go into the question and answer period. I'll first start with, let's see, do we have Council President Nick Mosby on the line? Okay, then I'll go to Madam Vice Chair, Sharon Green Middleton. Do you have any questions, ma'am?
No questions, but just a quick comment. Thank you, Catalina. I know you've been a representative of our immigrant communities for many years, and you do a wonderful job and continue to do that good work. The population is growing. We are a welcoming city, and your expertise is definitely needed.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Councilwoman Ramos, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So excited to call you Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Catalina, as well, for everything that you've done. I mean, one of the big things about what happened with our community during the pandemic was that a lot of our community was not eligible for the federal aid. And so could you talk a little bit about how the city was able to support our newly arrived neighbors who weren't eligible for the federal support, and what more do we need to do?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we actually worked closely with the Baltimore Civic Fund and created a funding collaborative in partnership with 15 foundations where we raise a significant amount of money to provide cash assistance to individuals who live in the city of Baltimore, have a child under the age of 18, and don't qualify for any public benefits because of their immigrant status. We actually work with 17 nonprofit organizations because as government, we recognize our role and in the fact that many of these families may be afraid of government. So we were lucky enough to have so many partners in this process. The other piece that is important to highlight is that the work should not end in Lima. The work should happen across city agencies, and we work very closely with city agencies across the board in identifying flexible funding sources that could assist individuals that do not qualify for federal benefits. So an example of that is MOCFS rental assistance. We've worked closely with them to ensure that as the program was being designed, that there were no barriers to our constituents, but also in making sure that we were advocating and identifying funding sources that were not restrictive because they came from the federal government. And that work is very behind the scenes. So we're very proud of that work. And we're also very glad that city agencies are open and welcome our ideas. And that's essentially the role that we've been trying to place ourselves as Lima, to be a technical assistance provider to help think agencies how to do it, when to do it, and how do you get to communities that are often vulnerable and invisible.
Yes,
and I think the second part of your question is, what could the city do more? So in terms of language access, the investment that the Scott administration has done is very significant. I think one piece that I would advocate is just making sure that city agencies are taking into consideration this constituency. Again, we are trying to work ourselves out of a job. Ideally, we wouldn't exist. And so that work needs to happen. And in that sense, we realize that we're trying to change the culture, and that takes time. The other piece I would say is advocating for additional public funding from CDBG, Youth Fund. Again, the work should not happen out of MEMA alone, but funding sources should take into consideration these constituencies, and we're there to help them to think through how to make that happen. But ideally, as time goes by, immigrants are not an afterthought.
Yes, I appreciate that. One thing that's come out of all of these hearings, because I keep asking people, are you hiring for people who speak other languages? You know, and then they say, well, we work with MEMA. Well, shouldn't we be doing it across the board, making sure that everybody is, you know, putting those people in place to be able to interface with our community, not just the immigrant community, but people who speak other languages who've been here for a lot of years. You and I both know several people who've been here for a lot of years who are residents and citizens. They speak Spanish. So we want to make sure that we are collaborating, you know, and making sure that our agencies are responsive. So I'm really glad that you you said that. I know that you've been also working, my second question is, you've been working on a shoestring budget. So tell us, you know, a little more about what more you want to do in the office and what you need.
So in terms of our office, we are an office of 3 full-time staff, a contractual position, and we have a Shriver Fellow, which is a part-time. Ideally, we would like to turn that language access coordinator position, which is a contractual position, into a permanent position, not just for MEMA, but to make sure that the city is compliant with Title VI and that there are no lawsuits against the city because we haven't been able to provide services in the language needed. So language access is not just because we as MEMA decided to do it, it's actually a federal compliance that any entity receiving federal dollars, including government, must provide resources in the language of the recipient. So that's actually a way for us to save ourselves dollars if we were to be sued. In fact, the police department was sued a couple years ago. So again, it's a prevention mechanism. So turning that position into a full-time position is critical, not just for MEMA, but for the city as a whole. The second component that we would love to do is additional outreach. We are very well staffed to address the needs of Latino immigrants, which are the largest sector of the immigrant population. But we are lacking additional diversity to do outreach and just further connection with Asian communities in particular. We have identified additional funding dollars. So we will be adding an additional position, but ideally we could be that conduit to communities and more importantly, to meet communities where they are.
Thank you. I really appreciate all your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Ramos. We've been fortunate to be joined by Councilman Stokes. Sir, did you have any questions?
No, I do not. I'm just here to Mr. Miss Catalina and find out how my office can be very supportive of her, what she's doing, great work she's doing, because I know in my district we have a lot of immigrants in the district. So I want to open the doors to my office and find out how we can really help you out in terms of helping your constituents that you have also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you so much, Councilman Stokes. Director Rodrigues Lima, I actually have a question. The immigrant communities where language is a barrier are often more organized advocates across the city. Communities of immigrants from African countries and the Caribbean countries tend to have fewer infrastructures to advocate for them. Can you share some strategies in which your office is working with those communities that are not as organized or not the majority, and as we've seen in other parts of Baltimore?
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman. So our language access coordinator is actually an immigrant from Cameroon, and he has been our point of contact to make sure that we're establishing relationships with that constituency. And you're absolutely right, they're a lot less organized, there is less resources. I think part of our role is to make sure that when we advocate for public funding from the various funding sources, that we're providing the tools needed for the nonprofit organizations that are serving these constituencies. So in that regard, we don't necessarily discriminate. When it comes to legal services, anyone can access those resources. When it comes to language access in the languages that we see as important, especially being French, one of them, that's the way that we want to meet communities where they are. The other piece to that, what I would say is, we work closely with the International Rescue Committee, where a lot of the communities that we want to tackle, especially from African countries, come through. So we often tap into nonprofit organizations that are working with those constituencies to make sure that they are well served. And we will continue to do that because we are a small office, so we rely heavily on the tentacles, as I call them, throughout the city. So we just don't work with Latino organizations, we work with everyone and anyone. And our role is to make sure that we are making information available in every language that is pertinent to the constituencies that we have.
Thank you so much, Director Rodrigues Lima. I'd also like to recognize that Councilman Zeke Cohen from the 1st District has joined. Sir, did you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Catalina, as always, good to see you. Want to thank you for just the work you did, not only during the pandemic in some of the toughest moments for our immigrant communities, but really over the last previous administration, which was a pandemic in and of itself for immigrants. I don't need to remind you the amount of ICE activity that we saw across Baltimore and just the sheer terror that the president and DHS spread within our communities. I'm curious, sort of as we transition, we're now in the Biden administration, hopefully we're going to see some real comprehensive immigration reform across the United States with a pathway to citizenship for some of the 11 million undocumented people that are living in the shadows. How do you see Baltimore transitioning from really being on defense over the last couple of years toward going on offense and doing more to push to really include, incorporate, and build with our immigrant community, documented or otherwise?
Thank you so much for that question. I think our role as a city is twofold, making sure that we have enough infrastructure to support those who qualify for an immigration relief to take advantage to that opportunity. I think the work of Safe City Baltimore, which happened a couple years ago, which was designed to protect immigrants against deportation and provide immigration relief for those who qualify but could not afford an attorney is very critical. The good news of that work is that because we have this project under the Baltimore Civic Fund, we're prepared to continue to fundraise from local and national foundations to increase capacity of nonprofit organizations providing legal services for immigrants that may qualify for immigration relief, to provide outreach and community education, which is really critical to ensure that immigrants are not being taken advantage of when things like this happen, when immigration reliefs happen. It is very common for immigrants to be victims of scams. And we have an entire strategy ready to go. What I would say is immigration legal services take a lot of funding sources and resources. We are prepared to advocate to administration and also to the foundation community to make sure that we have the tools in place to be able to provide legal services, consultation, make sure that people are not being scammed, and making sure that people can actually access resources.
Got it. All right. I do also want to commend you because I think that your office in particular, and you and Katie and everyone else, does a really good job of a lot of work behind the scenes that often doesn't get recognized. And I just want to take this moment to publicly recognize the amount you've done around food access, around, of course, Safe City Baltimore and the Legal Defense Fund, because it makes an impact and I see it in my district and it's not often lifted up as much as it should be. My second question for you actually sort of relates to what you were saying around scams, which is that we see an enormous amount of labor exploitation within our immigrant community. Often folks who are being paid in cash, under the table. We see significant amount of wage theft. We also see people falling prey to slum landlords, in some cases living multiple families to a home, in a very small row home, completely in violation of every city code. It's my hope that under these next couple of years where we're not constantly in fight or flight mode because the president is constantly spreading fear, that we can do more to support our community and keep folks safe, not only physically safe, but safe from being scammed, being taken advantage of financially, either through their labor or through their housing. Can you talk a little bit about what your office is doing and what more you all can do to prevent folks from being taken advantage of?
And Director Lima, Director Rodrigues Lima, before you answer that question, you have about 2 minutes. I just want to be mindful of the time. If you can provide a brief answer to Councilman Cohen, and then after I recommend follow-up.
Thank you, Councilwoman Porter. And thank you, Councilman Cohen, for your advocacy and support. Again, this work should not only exist in Lima. We actually work closely with the Office of Civil Rights. So in this regard, we've made sure that CASA is actually a place where people can place complaints, because again, people may not want to come forward and report things to government directly because of the fear that exists. What I would say is the Office of Civil Rights is one of our favorite offices because they've really taken language access to the next level. Not only they've been trained, translated documents, they've also hired bilingual personnel to address some of the complaints that you've mentioned, Councilman. And then in terms of landlords and rental assistance and tenants' rights, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of issues, but in the sense of immigrant families facing barriers, we actually see this as part of the rental assistance program where families are continue to be taken advantage. We are working with city agencies like Homeless Services, MOCFS, to make sure that these families know their rights through the Public Justice Center, but also know of resources, relocation resources available to them regardless of immigrant status. And then finally, our office is going to be launching a series of educational components about the rights of immigrants regardless of their immigrant status. And this information is being shared with anyone who's applying for rental assistance.
Thank you so much, Director Rodrigues Lima. I'm going to turn it back over to the chair of the committee, Chairman Costello, sir.
Catalina, I just wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and talk about all the great work that you're doing. I thought it was important for us to have you in front of the council because you're doing a lot of great work behind the scenes that folks may not be able to see or touch or feel every day. So really appreciate you being here and just please continue to keep up the great work on behalf of the city. Thank you so much. Councilman Stokes?
Mr. Chair, real quick, Catalina, can you make sure we get together so I can find out what you're actually doing in my district so we can, help out on my end with my staff. So I look forward to, I'll get my staff, send you an email so we can sit down and talk about some of the things you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilwoman Ramos, I got you in 1 second. Catalina, if you could just make sure someone from your team follows up with Councilman Stokes by the end of the day today over email, just so we can get working on getting that. Councilwoman Ramos. Yep, Rob. Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that our community is growing all over the city, so I think it's really important that each of the council members gets a chance to meet with Catalina and her shop as a way to figure out how we can make sure that we're serving all of our community around the city. And I'm happy to help in any way possible. Thank you.
Katie, if you could make sure we reach out to Councilwoman Ramos by the end of the day today so we get that scheduled. Councilman Glover?
Yeah, I was just with Councilman Ramos and Councilman Stokes had just speak upon. I just would like to get that information as well. Thank you.
So we're going to get a meeting set up for you too, Councilman Glover?
Yeah. Can I just ask one question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, but I would ask that you keep it as brief as possible because we're a minute over. But yes, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. Ms. Rodrigues, what are you guys doing to, prior to me coming over to the city council, I worked in the office of the state's attorney. What are you guys doing to ensure that those from the immigrant community that live in our neighborhoods are getting the services they deserve for free from city government? Because there are companies out there that are offering the services that we offer free for city government, but they're charging these individuals. They have like pop-up shops around like Broadway and Avenue, and they're charging these individuals for information that is free to the citizens here. What are you guys doing? Or do you have anything in place to make sure that they get that information for them and they don't have to pay a fee?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Yes, so I think part of the component of that is education and making sure that information is available in their language. Because of that, we have a communication arm that has a Facebook page, works with ethnic media across the city in Korean, Spanish, and Mandarin in particular. We also make sure that we work with nonprofit organizations to make sure that as they serve clients and other issues come up, that they know where to refer people. I agree with you that additional services have been developed because of some of the gaps that the city has, and I think our job is to make sure that we bridge those gaps.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Catalina, again, thank you. Katie, so great to see you again. And we're now in recess. We'll get started with Rec and Parks in a couple minutes. We're just working through getting some technical things in order. What I would not say is technical challenges, but I would say we're getting some technical stuff in order. So thank you.